I'm Kevin Davis, and this is the Family Podcast. Thank you all very much for joining me. And I know that I've gotten some heated comments in the last few videos where we discussed or read from really the book by Reverend Bandas, Biblical Questions. Now, the first two videos of the series covered creation, um, kind of short Earth versus old Earth theories, and I know some people thought that was, absolutely objectionable, and this priest must have been a modernist, etc. It's like, well, did you actually read what he said? I mean, yeah, maybe it seemed like his opinion may have been, yeah, okay, it leaned towards short Earth, but pretty much he said what you are allowed to believe and what you aren't. And that's the point. And I think this is really one of my main points of reading this. First of all, I think it's interesting. It's a good topic. These are good things to talk about, and it's great to have source material that has an imprimatur from 1943, I believe. But also because we have to remember that just because we hold an opinion doesn't mean it's true. And it certainly doesn't mean it's dogmatic. Just because I am absolutely sure of one thing, then it must be the case. No, it doesn't. Calm down. you know, Understand that what you believe to be true might be wrong. I think that there's so many of these things that we think that of other people. It's like, well, this person thinks that putting a certain substance in their body is good. Well, what an idiot. They're a moron and I know better. Well, you know what? There's probably things that we think that are actually really dumb too, and that's just how it is. I think we need to have a little bit of more humility. And these are not things, of course, considering the faith, but that's not opinion. We know the things given to us from God and from the church are true and good. There's no question of that. These are issues about, yeah, the earth or medicine or whatever else. So let's calm down a little bit and let's take these topics, these issues, and actually consider them. Actually, now the next subject today, we're going to talk about evolution. Now, anyone who knows me, Johnny, I know you're listening, knows I am very, very strongly against the theory of evolution, Darwinism, whatever you want to call it. I think it's a bunch of hogwash that doesn't make any sense. Now, other people disagree with me. And I think that's okay. What we're going to read today is what are we allowed to believe about that and what are we not. But again, if there's something in it that says, yeah, you're allowed to believe in evolution, I'm not going to be like, wow, this priest is a stupid modernist. I'm just going to be like, oh, okay, interesting. People can have opinions that aren't mine. Incredible. Anyway, I don't mean to be snarky. I apologize. Guys, let's calm down a little bit. Let's not get into this idea that we're just correct about all of our opinions, and many of which are undoubtedly wrong. Absolutely speaking for myself. Okay. Anyway, enough from me. Let's get to Reverend Bandas. This is from Biblical Questions, Chapter 3, Creation and Evolution. Absolute evolution. What does the Catholic Church teach about evolution? Is the Church opposed to the evolutionary hypothesis? May a Catholic accept evolution without prejudice to his faith? These and similar questions are frequently raised in the press and in conversations between Catholics and those outside the Church. In the present chapter, we shall point out the kind of evolution to which a Catholic may not subscribe. In the first place, a Catholic may not, obviously, admit an evolutionistic theory which denies the existence of a first cause, of a creator and conserver of the universe. St. Paul explicitly teaches that man can reason from effects observable in the world to the existence of a supreme being. Quote, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, his eternal power also and divinity. Unquote. That's taken from Romans. The same God created heaven and earth out of nothing. Quote, I beseech thee, my son, look upon heaven and earth and all that is in them, and consider that God made them out of nothing. Unquote. That's from Maccabees. Over these works of his hands, God rules by his beneficent providence, reaching from end to end mightily and ordering all things sweetly, as taken from wisdom. Secondly, a Catholic may not admit an evolutionistic theory which postulates spontaneous generation in the strict sense. The exponents of spontaneous generation maintain that life is generated from dead matter without any pre existing germ or seed and entirely apart from God's intervention. This doctrine is contradicted by both science and sound philosophy. For it is an ever recurring fact of universal experience that every living being originates from a pre existing living being. The French savant Pasteur and other noted scientists have demonstrated with the aid of experiments that no life can be generated in a medium where all seeds and germs have been destroyed. The minute animals, which are sometimes said to be the minute animals, which are sometimes said to be generated in the air, do not originate from inorganic matter, but from germs and seeds deposited and floating in the air. The experiments of Pasteur have been pronounced as true by the French Academy. Huxley affirmed that Pasteur's experiments have exploded the doctrine of spontaneous generation, and Tyndall adds that no cause of so called spontaneous generation has as yet presented itself which could not be explained in several other ways. At this point, the infidel will perhaps admit and claim, although our laboratories have not produced life in the past, it is possible, nay, probable, that science will accomplish this feat in the near future. Again, note from the reader, this was written back in the 1940s. The answer, back to the text, the answer to this difficult simple is simple and excuse me. Let's do that again. The answer to this difficulty is simple and easy. Right reason tells us that no effect can exceed the perfection of its cause, or more precisely, of the totality of its causes. Should life at any time spring from matter, it would result from the fact that God Himself would intervene, and by His power supply what is wanting to the cause in order to be proportionate to the effect. Such an intervention of God is probably insinuated in Genesis 1:11, which refers to one of the stages of creation. Quote, "And God said, let the earth bring forth the green herb, and such as may seed." Unquote. Thirdly, no evolutionary theory which explains the origin of all things by a blind necessity or by a mere chance is acceptable. Chance is something accidental, disorderly, sporadic, and chaotic. It cannot explain the harmony, finality, the subordination of means to an end traceable everywhere in the universe. It cannot explain the wonderful coordination prevalent already in historical times among the various living species, nor the perfect subordination of organs to a common end within the same species. It cannot explain instinct in animals and intellect in man. Facts such as these point to and demand a supreme intelligence. After having recalled God's command that the earth bring forth herbs and trees, the author of Genesis continues, quote, "And the earth brought forth the green herb, and such as yielded seed according to its kind, and the tree that beareth fruit, having seed each one according to its kind." Unquote. That's Genesis 1:12. These words describe the execution of the divine command mentioned in the preceding verse and imply divine intervention. They indicate that species did not evolve fortuitously, but according to the plan of a wise and divine lawgiver. Finally, a Catholic may not approve any evolutionistic theory which presupposes that the world existed from all eternity. Scripture clearly states that the existing universe is not from everlasting, but was created by God in time. Quote, "In the beginning, God created heaven and earth." Unquote. Genesis 1:1. The Bible uses expressions which clearly indicate that the world had a beginning before the mountains were made, or the earth and the world was formed. Psalms, "The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his ways, before he made anything from the beginning." Proverbs, "He chose us in him before the foundations of the world." Ephesians. Modern writers appeal with increasing frequency to this doctrine of the eternity of matter, hoping thereby to dispense with the necessity of populating a first cause. But they overshot the mark. The world is imperfect, transitory, contingent. If it were eternal, although Revelation teaches us that it was made in time, it would be eternally insufficient and eternally in need of a first cause to sustain it in existence. Modern writers unwittingly prove the reality of one of God's attributes, namely eternity. Otherwise, they might as well affirm that the addition of an indefinite number of links will eventually make a suspended chain self sustaining, or that 10,000 idiots can constitute an intelligent person, or that brush, if its handle be long enough, will paint of itself. Moderate evolution. The theory of mitigated evolution, which affirms that all living species, except man, developed under God's providence from lower forms and more primitive types, is not opposed to divine faith and may be held by a Catholic. The words of Genesis, quote, "Let the earth bring forth its green herb," etc., imply some intervention of God's will in the determination of the species. But sacred scripture does not evidently affirm that God created all things at once in their full perfection. Scripture does not make it clear whether the species were created immediately or developed in the course of time, whether they were produced with an absolute or only a relative fixity. It is silent as to the manner in which the earth produces the variety of species. According to the learned psychologist Father Lahuse, quote, "The derivation of some species from others still leaves us free to say that God created them on a determined day or epoch. God foresaw from all eternity the subsequent species which would come into existence and endowed the primitive types with the power to produce them. In this sense, God may be said to have created immediately all the subsequent species." Is moderate evolution scientifically tenable? Many savants, Catholic as well as non Catholic, accept this theory. Father Tanqueray sums up their arguments under the following fine heads. Number one, the embryo of the more perfect animals passes through certain stages in which it bears resemblance to lower species, the remains of which are to be found in the strata of the earth. The evolution of every embryo is, as it were, a recapitulation of recapitulation. Boy, I am having a hard time today. A recapitulation of the history of the species. This fact is confirmed in addition by the existence of certain rudimentary bodily organs, which were once useful, but which have gradually atrophied and become superfluous. Two, the remains of various species of animals found in the layers of the earth follow one another in such orderly succession that we are justified in concluding that the higher species originated from the less perfect. Three, the marvelous uniformity of the organisms among the different classes of living beings betrays their common descent from one of a few types. They are like branches proceeding from a common trunk. Four, animals of the same country or of neighboring countries to which there is an easy passage from the former bear great resemblances one to another. On the other hand, animals of widely separated countries are most dissimilar. Hence, living beings are so modified by the environment that new species gradually arose. Five, by means of artificial selection, new properties have been produced in existing species. After several generations, these properties will be intensified to such an extent that a new species will be produced. If this is possible today, when the species have acquired a certain fixity and stability, how much more would this be the case when they were still flexible because of their youth? The opponents of moderate evolution, as Father Tanqueray points out, parallel these arguments with equally cogent and perhaps more philosophical answers. 1. The development of the embryo does not prove the truth of evolution, since it always takes place in the same way and within the same limits. All that we can infer is that the higher species possess the perfections of the lower. An organ, the utility of which is not immediately apparent, is not necessarily vestigial and superfluous. Number two, the disposition of the fossils in the geological strata does not prove that the more perfect originated from the less perfect. It merely shows that the former came after the latter. Frequently, we find the two side by side, and occasionally, the more perfect precedes the less perfect. Number three, although there are great resemblances between closely related species, there are similarities, both internal and external. The marvelous uniformity among organisms does not necessarily establish a common origin, but shows that God, in creating living things, wishes that for the greater perfection of the universe, there be unity amid variety. 4. The geographical distribution of the species is easily explained by admitting several centers of creation. God created in each country such species as would adapt themselves to the surroundings and environment. 5. Artificial selection may produce new varieties of species, but not new species. Besides, such new varieties will speedily vanish if left to shift for themselves. Hybrids are seldom fertile, and even if fertile, cannot produce a new species. The arguments of both the exponents and opponents of moderate evolution are weighty, but not conclusive. The investigations and progress of science will probably show which of the two views will ultimately prevail. Emergent evolution. An evolutionary theory, which is at present enjoying considerable vogue in the English speaking countries, is that of emergent evolution. Closely related to this theory is that of holism, which describes the universe as a system of quote unquote wholes. The author of the former is Lloyd Morgan, of the latter, General J.C. Smuts, according to Mrs. Morgan. Mr. Morgan, the universe in its first stages consisted of some physical, unspecified forerunner of matter, distributed in systems of very simple organization. These systems gradually became more complex. Varied combinations gave rise to chemical elements such as oxygen, hydrogen, sulfur, iron, etc. The qualities of these resultants were the quote emergence. They were new in the world on their first appearance and gave rise to events which were different from all previous occurrences. The process by which they arose is best designated by the term emergence. The elements, in turn, combined with one another in various ways. Carbon united with sulfur to form carbon bisulfide, hydrogen to form hydrochloric acid, oxygen with hydrogen to form water. A molecule of water exhibited emergent qualities, that is, properties not manifested by nor discoverable in hydrogen and oxygen in their pure state. The potentialities previously latent in the two elements now became actualized. Synthesis, or wholes of further degrees of complexity, resulted in the emergence of life. This new emergent was not due to the influence of some extrinsic energy or force, but to new kinds of intrinsic relatedness and complexity. As these new intrinsic relations were established, properties emerged distinctive of living beings, namely irritability, conductivity, power of growth, assimilation, regeneration, etc. Further conjunctions of living systems and further intrinsic complications resulted successively in the emergence of science of sentience, cognition, mind, intellect, and moral responsibility. Whatever may be said in favor of the modernity of emergent evolution, to us the theory presents very serious difficulties. In the first place, when came this quote unquote unspecified forerunner of matter, the existence of which is postulated by Mr. Morgan? Is it eternal or is it self explanatory, suppositions which are patently false? Or is it created by God? By implicitly affirming spontaneous generation, the generation of life from dead matter without any pre existing seed or germ, and entirely apart from God's intervention, the theory is exposed to all the objections that can be urged against that absurd tenet. The theory postulates the irrational principles that the lower can of itself and out of itself produce the higher, the less perfect, the more perfect. It derives man both as to his soul and body from the evolutionary process and excludes the special intervention of God in the creation of our first parents. Let us not think, however, that the church is entirely hostile to the conception of the world presented by Morgan and Smuts. St. Thomas, too, has his system of philosophical holism, but his explanation differs from the theories of contemporary philosophy in that it recognizes an all wise, ordaining, creative intelligence and is free from the absurd principles that the greater comes from the less and that the higher is subject to the lower. Catholic thought believes in the interlocking of beings. It recognizes that all creation is arranged without a leap or break in a wondrous sequence of stages of development. In a magnificent chain of beings, life is found in every conceivable and progressive form. The gradation from the lowest particle of matter up to the highest spirit is an uninterrupted ascension from perfection to perfection. There is no gap in the universe, no violent transition. The universe is a perfect whole in which the higher being invariably possesses the perfection of the being that precedes it. The universe has all the continuance of growth. Even when growth is no longer possible, namely in the angelic kingdoms, there is an uninterrupted continuance in the scale of beings. And that ends today's piece from Reverend Bandas. Again, I thank the priest who recommended this to us. Chapter 4, The Origin of Man. We might cover that next. We may hop around to see if there's any other topic that he covers that we'd be more interested in. We'll have to see. But I think again this is really interesting because he lays out these different opinions and says, hey, this is what you can believe and this is what you can't. And there's many things that we can believe. Again, short Earth, old Earth, evolution. I don't believe in evolution. I don't. I think it's silly. But I don't condemn someone who does. Again, as long as you hold to the principles, as pointed out by the Reverend here, about what you can and cannot believe regarding evolution. So I hope that this does, again, give food for thought. Does me for sure. I really appreciate these things. I think these are, again, topics that it's good to have on our minds. You never know when the topic's going to come up. You never know when you're going to have to talk about old Earth or evolution. It does come up, not often, but sometimes, especially with certain friends. And so I think it's good to be aware, not even of the facts, not even of the different opinions, but of what is allowable. What is dogmatic? What can we believe and what can't we believe? That's so important. If someone else holds a different opinion, now if they hold a different opinion of faith, if someone says, "Yeah, hey, I'm a Buddhist," then, yeah, okay, well, you're wrong. Period. End of story. That is absolutely dogmatic. Now, obviously, the modern church says otherwise, but well, that's why we know they can't be the church, right? But if it's something to do with science, even if it is something like sticking, foreign elements into your body, which we strongly disagree with, myself included, I think we got to be really careful about, the morality of it. And it's something I've learned with these shows with Father McKenna, which I greatly appreciate, that you see that you got to be really careful to deal out death and judgment. I mean, morality is a very difficult topic, and you see why priests study for years and years to have a grasp of it. The black and white that we see to be black and white is probably actually not. I'm not saying there's not black and white, but we don't see it as we should oftentimes. So let's just remember that. And again, if anyone wants this pamphlet, I think you can find it online. Again, it's called Biblical Questions by Reverend Bandas. It was written back, or had the imprimatur from 1943, I believe. It may have been 1948, I forget. In the 1940s, from, I believe, the Archbishop of St. Paul. And anyway, very interesting. And we'll see again if we can record again soon. I'm heading on vacation next week, so hopefully I'll get a couple things recorded here, and you'll all just not even notice that I'm gone. So let's see. Anyway, till next time. God bless you all.